Hey guys, my name is Matimio, and welcome to another episode of Sunday Mailbox. This is a video series where you, the viewer, can submit your gaming or Battlefield-related questions, and then I will give my humble opinion on them. To get the formalities out of the way real quick, if you would like to submit your own question that could be featured in an upcoming episode, you can do so by leaving a comment down below, or by sending me a Facebook and Twitter message. The first question for today is, what do you feel about the lack of destruction so far in Battlefield Hardline? This is probably the biggest disappointment that I've had with the beta, because while overall I have been very impressed by what Visceral has delivered on, we look back at the alpha to where we are today, it is a night and day difference. But because this is a spin-off, much like Bad Company 2 was a spin-off, and it's focused on infantry-based combat in smaller maps, I was hoping that it would also get the Bad Company 2 treatment in the destruction department. Clearly, that is not the case. I should mention that when the game releases, there will be a few maps that have that type of destruction that we've all been waiting for and hoping for in a Battlefield game. The block, for example, every single building that you come across is basically fully destructible, or to the point where it will just be a shell of itself, so that's awesome. But the stipulation to that, and the problem, is that the map is tiny. It is probably one of the smallest maps that we've had in the Battlefield franchise in a very long time, and so it leads me to believe that the reason why we don't have as much destruction as we were hoping for is because, well, the graphical fidelity of Battlefield has been increasing over the years. The game just keeps looking better and better, but we're still trying to put it on the old gen systems. I'm assuming destruction is pretty hard on the hardware. It's not easy to have things flying around everywhere, and so the fact that the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 are still being taken into consideration when they're building these maps, that's the only thing I can come up with for why we have such a lack of destruction. That being said though, to some extent, I would even argue that at least on certain sections of the map, the lack of destruction hasn't been a negative. It's actually been a good thing. I know this sounds blasphemous, especially to a lot of you Battlefield veterans out there, but the best example that I can think of is the motel on Dust Bowl. I love fighting for that central capture point. It is pure chaos. You can hide in all the nooks and crannies, all the different rooms. If you jump out of a window, you can catch a bunch of enemies by surprise who were assuming that they would get the flank off on you. It is amazing infantry-based gameplay, but as soon as you have the capability of shooting out all the walls with an M320 or shooting out the walls just with your bullets, like that micro-destruction, it would turn into a ghost town. By the end of the round, no one would want to fight over that objective because it would be a shell of its former self. There would be nothing to hide behind, and so that gameplay that we've grown to love, fighting over that capture point, or at least what I've grown to love during the beta, would be completely taken away. That doesn't excuse the fact, though, that the rest of the map is just ridiculously stagnant. The smaller buildings should have some destructibility, at least in my eyes, because right now, for all we know, they're made out of legendary mithril for how resilient they are. You shoot an M320, a grenade, a SMAW, and you're not even gonna make a dent on any section of this map. It's just ridiculous. The only true destruction that we have is the Levolution moment that happens and a few planks or wooden fences along the way. That's it. Really disappointing. And so in general, while it by no means ruins the game, and to some extent I would even argue that it is a good thing, just the fact that every Battlefield that comes out seems to have less and less destruction is a disappointment overall. The next question for today comes from Trevor, and it is, what do you think about changing the mortars back to how they were in Bad Company 2? I would not be opposed to this, because while I do not think that Bad Company 2 system was perfect, even though a lot of us have nostalgia for that game and we remember everything being amazing back in Bad Company 2, it was by no means a flawless system, but it is leagues better from what we have right now in Battlefield 4. What I hate about the Battlefield 4 mortars is that there's no interaction with the person who is using them and whoever is on the receiving end. If you want to, you can be behind a rock, never exposing yourself to the enemy, or even all the way in your deployment and still doing damage to the enemy team. That seems like a poor game design. Same is true for the UCAV. Any capability of being completely safe or away from the action, but still being able to do a ridiculous amount of damage or pester the enemy team just doesn't sit very well with me. And so what I loved about the Bad Company 2 system is that if you wanted to call in a mortar, you wanted to eliminate the enemy that were hunkered down behind a rock, you had to leave yourself exposed. You had to get up, you had to look down your binoculars for a couple of seconds, maintain the lock, and that entire process took a few couple of seconds, which allowed the enemy to shoot you and kill you. I can remember multiple occasions, this happened all the time when I played as the Recon, where people had no problem sniping me and taking me out when I did try to pull off one of these mortars. And so it allows you to have more of an interaction. Granted, I felt like they did a little bit too much damage, and especially if we bumped it up to 64 players, if there were 64 players running around and 10 of them had mortars, it would get a little absurd, and so they would probably have to reduce the damage of the mortars compared to what it was back in Bad Company 2, or just reduce how many fly on in when you call in a mortar strike. But overall, because there is that dynamic and you can actually react or counter someone who is calling in a mortar, I felt like it was a far superior system. And so while not perfect, I 100% agree with you, and while I don't think that it's ever going to happen for Battlefield 4, there's no way that they're going to add in a completely new dynamic there. For the upcoming Battlefield game, I would be one happy camper if they did decide to go down this route. The next question for today comes from Sebastian, and it is, what do you think about the RPGs in the trunks of cars in Hardline? I think that they are way too powerful on Hotwire. I have been saying this all along because it is flat out busted. You are right. The RPG, being able to access that from the trunk of your car, is completely broken. I love Hotwire, and for the first couple hours during the beta, it was amazing. Even today, I would still say it is amazing, but the reason why I loved it in the past was because there weren't 1,000 different ways to take out the cars. You had your M320, a few people had the breaching charges, a few people were using the trip mines effectively on the professional class, but in general, you were in the back of the car, people were having these awesome duels, you know, driving next to each other like Mad Max and just shooting at each other. It's awesome. I love that combat. But now, because people have been accumulating some money and they now have unlocked the RPG in the back of the trunk, you just see RPGs flying around everywhere. And while I will say that it makes for some amazing Battlefield moments, explosions are happening all over the place, it just trivializes the combat. You don't have really any more of those duels with cars driving next to each other. People aren't able to use the M3, or they can use the M320, but it's nowhere near as effective as just waiting for an RPG to spawn in the back of your trunk. And so what I'm hoping for is that Visceral will realize that it is way too powerful in its current state and either just eliminate it from the game so it's no longer accessible in the back of the trunk, or make it so that you can only hold on to one RPG. I did mention to a developer a few weeks ago when I went to a Battlefield Hardline event that I felt like this was gonna turn into a mess and it was going to take away from the combat that I'm assuming that they were going for. And his counter argument to that was that it's expensive. It's gonna take a lot of money and time to unlock the junk in the trunk ability or to unlock the RPG. And while I can sort of get that argument, a few weeks in or a month in, it's gonna turn into a hot mess. By that point, people have invested enough time, even if they're just a casual player, they're gonna accumulate enough money to be able to unlock it. And so yeah, for the first couple of days, it's not gonna be a problem, but as we already see in the beta, it's already an issue. And so I'm hoping that they realize that this mechanic or this functionality is just a little bit too powerful and they go down the route of just eliminating it entirely or reducing it to only one RPG. The next question for today comes from David, and it is, what do you think about adding a 8x Iron V scope for the Recon class? Since the night version of Siege of Shanghai is now available on the CTE, I think that this would be a great addition into the game. I was actually thinking about this the other day because when I was playing on the night map, you guys hopefully have seen the Siege of Shanghai night version, I wanted it to be darker, but then I thought to myself, well, if we make it really dark, how in the world is a Recon ever going to be able to use a bolt-action rifle? I mean, that is the bread and butter of playing as the Recon class. I mean, you could use the infrared night vision scope, but you're not, I mean, that's not what a Recon is all about. 8x scope, 12x scope, all of those amazing high-powered bolt-action rifles, you're going to want to be able to zoom into the enemy, and so it would only make sense to be able to also maybe have a higher optic Iron V. The tricky thing about it is that if you remember back in Battlefield 3, the infrared night vision scope was overpowered. Everyone was using it on the battlefield because while it did have some limitations, there was that really large black border like it always has. If you aim down sight, everyone lit up like a Christmas tree. It was really obvious where everyone was. You couldn't hide from someone who was using the infrared night vision scope. And to some extent, you would assume that's how it would work in real life, but it didn't matter if you were playing on a dim map or a bright map. It was just an awesome attachment to use for basically every single one of the weapons. And so DICE realized that was too powerful. Having everyone show up as crystal clear as they did with that scope just took away the reason to use any of the other scopes in the game. And so the worry that I have is that if they did decide to add in this awesome, powerful scope, would it be as amazing as the Battlefield 3 version before it got nerfed? I'm not exactly sure how DICE would be able to go about balancing it out, because I do think that that should be something added with the night maps, especially if they go darker, and I'm crossing my fingers that they do go darker. I want to have that awesome night combat experience, but then we run into the problem where a Recon is going to get on one of these rooftops and is going to be able to sit there all game long, have a crystal clear view of the entire map. As soon as he aimed down sights, he's going to have no problem being able to see every single enemy, and that might be just a little bit too good. But I'd like to know what you guys think about this. Would you be in favor of having a high-powered Iron V scope added for the bolt-action rifles in the game, or do you think that that would be a little bit too amazing? But yeah, guys, that is about it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Once again, if you would like to submit your own question that could be featured in an upcoming episode, you can do so by leaving a comment down below or by sending me a Facebook and Twitter message. But until tomorrow, guys, have a good one and take it easy.